The marble floors of Harrison Industries headquarters echoed with each step as I approached the executive conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see my family already gathered, the worthy heirs to my grandfather's empire. My uncle Richard, Aunt Patricia, and my cousins William and Victoria, all dressed in expensive black attire, looking appropriately solemn for the occasion. Alex. My uncle's voice carried that familiar condescension as he stepped out to block my path. This is a private meeting. Family only. I checked my watch, 2:57 p.m. I am family. You know what I mean, he smirked, adjusting his Rolex, the one Grandpa had given him last Christmas. This is for actual heirs. People who've been involved in the business, not whatever it is you've been doing. Behind him I could see William and Victoria exchanging smug looks, the golden grandchildren who'd been groomed for succession since birth, while I was the family disappointment who'd walked away from the corporate track 5 years ago. Actual heirs, I repeated softly. Like the ones who nearly tanked the Singapore merger last year. Richard's face reddened. He'd never forgiven me for questioning that deal during my brief stint in the company. The fact that I'd been right, that the Asian market wasn't ready for their aggressive expansion, had only made him hate me more. Mr. Harrison. A security guard approached. Mr. Stevens is ready to begin. Perfect timing, Richard smiled. Please escort my nephew out. He's not on the approved list. I glanced at my watch again, 2:59 p.m. Actually, I pulled out my phone showing the guard an email. I have an invitation from Mr. Stevens himself. The guard nodded, stepping aside. Richard's face contorted with confusion as I walked past him into the conference room. I took a seat at the far end of the table, away from the family cluster. Mr. Stevens, the family's longtime lawyer, entered precisely at 3 p.m. He carried a leather portfolio I recognized. Grandpa had kept all his important documents in it for 40 years. Before we begin, Richard announced, shooting me a glare, there seems to be some confusion about attendance. There's no confusion, Mr. Stevens interrupted, laying out his papers. Everyone who needs to be here is present. I caught the slight emphasis on needs. My fingers traced the edge of my own portfolio, hidden in my briefcase. Inside was the document that would change everything. The proof of what I'd accomplished, while they'd been dismissing me as the family failure. As you know, Mr. Stevens began. Harrison Industries has been a family-owned corporation for 3 generations. However, in the past month, there have been significant changes in ownership structure. Victoria leaned forward. What changes? Grandpa would never sell. Your grandfather, Mr. Stevens continued, made several strategic decisions in his final weeks. The most significant being the sale of controlling interest in Harrison Industries to a new holding company. The room erupted in chaos. Richard slammed his hand on the table. Impossible. Who would dare? Phoenix Global Ventures, Mr. Stevens announced, acquired 51% of Harrison Industries through a series of private transactions last month. The remaining shares will be distributed according to your grandfather's will, but operational control now rests with Phoenix CEO. I checked my watch one final time. 3:02 p.m. Showtime. Who? William demanded. Who's behind Phoenix? Mr. Stevens allowed himself the smallest smile. Perhaps Mr. Alexander Harrison would like to address that question. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. 5 years of careful planning, of working in shadows while they mocked my failure to launch, had led to this moment. I stood straightening my jacket. Phoenix Global Ventures was established 3 years ago. We've been quietly acquiring undervalued companies across Asia and Europe, restructuring them and building a multinational consortium. You? Victoria laughed, but there was an edge of hysteria to it. That's ridiculous. You can barely manage your own bank account. I pulled out my tablet, activating the room's presentation system. Across the walls, screens came to life, showing Phoenix's portfolio. Dozens of companies, billions in assets, and at the center of it all, Harrison Industries. That meaningless job I took in Singapore after leaving here, I continued. It was with a venture capital firm. I learned international finance, while you were attending charity galas. When you were mocking my lack of direction, I was building relationships with investors across 3 continents. Richard stood up so quickly, his chair toppled backward. This is a joke, some kind of sick revenge fantasy. The Singapore merger you botched, I cut in. I was the anonymous buyer who acquired those assets at a discount. While you were bragging about your corner office, I was building an empire that could swallow Harrison Industries whole. Mr. Stevens began distributing documents. These detail the new corporate structure. Mr. Alexander Harrison, as CEO of Phoenix Global Ventures, now holds controlling interest and executive authority over all Harrison Industries operations. Grandpa would never allow this, William protested weakly. Actually, I smiled. It was his idea. The room fell silent again as I pulled out my phone, playing a video recording. There was Grandpa in his hospital room 2 months ago, looking directly into the camera. Richard, kids. His voice was weak but clear. If you're watching this, Alex has done exactly what I hoped he would. While you were fighting over who'd get my office, he was learning how to build something of his own. The company needs new blood, new vision. Alex showed me what Phoenix has accomplished. He's ready, more than ready. I paused the video, letting the words sink in. Grandpa approached me 6 months ago. He'd been watching Phoenix's rise, figured out I was behind it. We planned this together. But the inheritance. Victoria's voice trembled. You'll all receive your shares as planned, Mr. Stevens confirmed. But operational control rests with Phoenix, with Alex. I walked to the head of the table, my grandfather's seat for 40 years. The first board meeting is tomorrow at 9 a.m. I expect full attendance and detailed reports on all current projects. I paused, looking each family member in the eye. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to tender your resignations. Richard found his voice first. You can't just walk in here and I already have. I cut him off. The papers are signed, the shares are transferred. Harrison Industries is now a subsidiary of Phoenix Global Ventures. I sat down in my grandfather's chair. And I'm no longer the nephew you can dismiss. I'm your boss. The next hour was a blur of legal documents, shocked expressions, and attempted arguments. Through it all, I maintained the calm I'd learned while building Phoenix from nothing, the same calm they'd mistaken for lack of ambition. As the family filed out, still reeling, Mr. Stevens stayed behind. Your grandfather would be proud, he said quietly. He always knew you were different. Special. I picked up the family photo on the credenza, taken at last year's Christmas party. They'd put me in the back, barely visible. They never understood, I replied. Success doesn't always wear a designer suit and boast about its achievements. Sometimes it works quietly, building something extraordinary while no one's watching. Mr. Stevens gathered his papers. The board meeting tomorrow should be interesting. Have security ready, I said, and make sure the executive suite is cleared out tonight. I want my grandfather's office ready first thing tomorrow. After he left, I stood at the window of what was now my conference room, looking out over the city. Somewhere in the building my family was probably already plotting, scheming, trying to find a way to challenge what had happened. Let them try. I hadn't spent 5 years building an international business empire without learning how to protect what was mine. My phone buzzed, a message from my grandfather's private number, scheduled months ago. Show them what real success looks like, Alex. The quiet ones always see furthest. I smiled, sitting down at the head of the table that had been his for so long. The empire hadn't just changed hands, it had evolved, and tomorrow, bright and early, I would begin showing my family exactly what they'd missed while they were too busy looking down on me. The real work was just beginning. The next morning, I arrived at Harrison Industries at 6 a.m., well before any of my family members would show up. The executive floor was eerily quiet as I used my new keycard to enter my grandfather's, now my office. The security team had worked through the night, replacing the old nameplates and updating access protocols. Good morning, Mr. Harrison. My executive assistant Marcus greeted me. I'd brought him over from Phoenix, knowing I'd need someone I could trust. Your Uncle Richard has already called 4 times. I'm sure he has. I settled behind the massive mahogany desk, noting how they'd left most of my grandfather's personal items untouched. What's his mood? He mentioned something about family lawyers and shareholder rights. Marcus handed me a tablet, displaying the morning's agenda. Also, your cousin William was seen entering Anderson and Pierce's offices last night. I smiled. Anderson and Pierce, the law firm known for handling contentious corporate takeovers. Let them waste their money. Every document is ironclad. The door opened, and Sarah Mitchell, My head of operations at Phoenix entered. She'd been my first hire 3 years ago, when everyone else thought I was just finding myself in Asia. The transition team is ready, she reported. And you should see this. She pulled up a series of social media posts from my cousin Victoria, hinting at illegal corporate manipulations and family betrayal. Have legal send her a reminder about non-disclosure agreements, I said, pulling up the morning's financial reports, and schedule a full audit of every department. I want to know exactly what they've been hiding. By 8:45 a.m., the executive floor was buzzing with activity. I watched through the glass walls as my family arrived for the 9 a.m. board meeting, their faces a mix of shock and anger at seeing their old offices already being cleared out. Richard was the first to burst into my office, his face red with fury. This is outrageous. You can't just, good morning, Uncle Richard. I cut him off smoothly. The boardroom is down the hall. We start in 10 minutes. Listen here, you ungrateful. No, I stood up, my voice carrying the authority I'd developed running Phoenix. You listen. For years you treated me like I was beneath you, called me weak for wanting to learn the business from the ground up. Now you work for me. The board meeting is down the hall. He stood there sputtering, as Sarah entered with more reports. The Singapore audit is complete, she announced, deliberately ignoring Richard's presence. It's worse than we thought. Add it to the agenda. I nodded. Oh, and Uncle Richard, I'd suggest calling Anderson and Pierce, and canceling William's consultation. It would be embarrassing to waste their time. His face went pale. How did you? I know everything that happens in my company, I replied calmly. 9 minutes until the meeting. The boardroom was tense as the family filed in. Victoria was typing furiously on her phone, probably crafting another angry social media post. William kept adjusting his tie, a nervous tell he'd had since childhood. Aunt Patricia sat rigid, her expression frozen in what she probably thought was dignified outrage. At precisely 9 a.m., I entered with my team. Good morning, I began, taking my place at the head of the table. Let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, this is happening. Yes, it's legal. And yes, your jobs are currently under review. You have no right, William started. I have every right. I cut him off, gesturing to Sarah to start the presentation. Phoenix Global Ventures now owns controlling interest in Harrison Industries. More importantly, we've completed our preliminary audit. The screens around the room lit up with financial data. The Singapore disaster, that was just the tip of the iceberg. Would anyone like to explain why our European division has been hemorrhaging money for the past 2 years? Victoria's phone slipped from her fingers. Those numbers had been carefully hidden from the regular reports. Or perhaps, I continued, switching to another screen, someone would like to explain these interesting consulting fees being paid to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Richard's face had gone from red to white. Those were his pet projects, the ones he thought nobody knew about. Here's how this is going to work. I laid out a stack of folders. Each of you will receive a complete review of your department's performance. You have until the end of the week to explain these discrepancies. If your explanations satisfy our audit team, you keep your jobs. If not, I let the silence hang. You can't fire us, Aunt Patricia finally spoke. We're family. Funny, I replied. That didn't seem to matter when you were all trying to push me out 5 years ago. When you told Grandpa I was too soft for business. Sarah distributed the folders as I continued. Phoenix Global Ventures operates differently. We value competence over connections, results over relationships. You want to stay, prove you deserve to be here. And if we refuse, William challenged. I smiled, pulling up another document. Then you can exercise your right to sell your shares. At today's market value, I paused for effect, though I should mention that news of the audit might affect that value significantly. The room fell silent as they processed the implication. They were trapped, and they knew it. One more thing, I added, standing up. Victoria, delete the social media posts. All of them. Sarah has screenshots, and our legal team is very interested in your definition of corporate manipulation. As they filed out, clutching their folders like life preservers, Marcus entered with a fresh report. Sir, the international offices are online for your conference call. And, your grandfather's personal files have been retrieved from the secure storage. I nodded, feeling the weight of the last 24 hours. Show me. In my office, I opened the old leather briefcase they'd brought up from storage. Inside were decades of my grandfather's private notes, including a letter addressed to me, dated just weeks before his death. Alex, it began, by now you've done what none of them thought possible. You built something of your own, learned the business your way, and proved that true strength isn't about who shouts the loudest in board meetings. I remembered all the quiet conversations we'd had in this very office, late at night, when everyone else had gone home. How he'd listened to my ideas about international markets, about sustainable growth, about building something that would last. They never understood, the letter continued, that I was teaching you the most important lesson of all: how to watch, learn, and build in silence. The empire isn't just about money or power, it's about vision. You have it, they never did. My phone buzzed with messages from the international offices, waiting for their new CEO. The empire wasn't just Harrison Industries anymore. It was something bigger, something I'd built while they were too busy mocking my choices to notice. Tomorrow, the real changes would begin. But for now, I sat in my grandfather's chair, holding his letter, finally understanding why he'd smiled, that knowing smile every time the family had dismissed me. He'd known all along what I would become. 1 week after the takeover, the true scope of my family's mismanagement began to emerge. I sat in my office, reviewing the comprehensive audit reports with Sarah and Marcus, each page revealing another layer of incompetence and self-dealing. Your cousin William's department has been particularly creative with the books, Sarah noted, highlighting several suspicious transactions. In the Debis Aldermunsigan, he's been charging personal expenses as business costs for years. Private jets, luxury vacations, even his daughter's sweet 16 party. And Victoria, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Marcus pulled up another report. She's been running a shadow consulting firm, charging Harrison Industries premium rates for reports copied from public sources. The company's been paying her double salary, essentially. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the family photos my grandfather had kept on his wall. All those posed smiles and designer suits, hiding years of entitled corruption. Sir, my assistant's voice came through the intercom. Your Uncle Richard is here with his lawyer. Right on schedule, I smiled. Send them in. Richard stormed in, followed by a nervous-looking attorney from Anderson and Pierce. This witch hunt has gone far enough, he declared, throwing a folder on my desk. We're prepared to fight this hostile takeover. I didn't even glance at the folder. Instead, I pressed a button, lowering the office's glass privacy screens. Sarah, please show them what we found in the Singapore audit. The screens filled with transaction records, emails, and bank transfers. Richard's face went from righteous anger to poorly concealed panic as he recognized his own paper trail. These documents, Sarah explained professionally, show systematic embezzlement through inflated contracts, kickbacks, and ghost employees. Conservative estimate puts the damage at around $40 million. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Richard's hands were shaking. This is a misunderstanding. Is it? I stood up, walking to my grandfather's old safe, because Grandpa didn't think so. He kept quite detailed records of his suspicions. I pulled out a thick file. He just needed someone outside the family's influence to prove it. You wouldn't dare expose this, Richard threatened weakly. It would destroy the company's reputation. Phoenix Global Ventures specializes in turning around troubled companies, I replied calmly. Our investors understand that sometimes we have to clean house. The question is, Uncle Richard, do you want to resign quietly, or should we let the SEC make their own conclusions? The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Harrison, perhaps we could discuss terms.
Of course.
I handed them another folder. Full resignation, surrender of all shares at current market value, and a binding non-disclosure agreement. In return, Phoenix doesn't press charges. This is blackmail, Richard sputtered. No, I corrected him. This is business. The kind you thought I was too soft to understand. I checked my watch. You have until close of business today to decide. After they left, Marcus raised an eyebrow. Think he'll sign? He doesn't have a choice. Schedule meetings with William and Victoria for tomorrow. Same terms. By evening, Richard's signed resignation was on my desk. The mighty uncle who'd once called me a disappointment had been reduced to begging for a quiet exit. The family empire was crumbling, but something stronger was rising from its ashes. My phone buzzed. A message from an old friend in Singapore. Heard you finally showed them who's boss. Your grandfather would be proud. I smiled, remembering those early days in Asia, learning the business from the ground up, while my family thought I was running away from responsibility. Every late night, every missed holiday, every dismissive comment from them had just fueled my determination. Sarah entered with the latest market reports. Stocks up 12% since the announcement of new management. The board's external members are particularly pleased with the audit's transparency, and the employees' morale's improving. Turns out a lot of people were tired of watching the family treat the company like their personal piggy bank. I nodded, pulling up the restructuring plans we'd spent months preparing. Start implementing phase 2. I want the new department heads announced by next week. Already done, though. She hesitated. Your Aunt Patricia is demanding a family dinner to discuss things civilly. Of course she was. Aunt Patricia, the family peacekeeper, always trying to smooth things over, with expensive dinners and empty promises. Decline politely. Tell her all communication should go through legal from now on. The next morning, William and Victoria arrived separately for their meetings. William tried bluster, threatening to expose family secrets. Victoria attempted emotional manipulation, crying about betrayal and family loyalty. Both left with signed resignations and significantly lighter stock portfolios. By the end of the week, the old guard was gone. Harrison Industries was no longer a family company running on nepotism and favors. It was part of something bigger, a global corporation built on merit and vision. Late Friday night, as I was reviewing the transition reports, my assistant announced an unexpected visitor. My grandfather's old chauffeur, Mr. Sullivan. Come in, James. I called out, remembering how he'd always snuck me candy during those long corporate events I'd hated as a child. The old man entered slowly, carrying a small box. Your grandfather asked me to give you this once everything was settled. He placed it carefully on my desk. He said you'd know when the time was right. Inside the box was my grandfather's old pocket watch, the one he'd worn to every board meeting for 40 years. Attached was a note in his familiar handwriting. To the grandson who learned to tell time by watching, waiting and working, the empire is yours now, Alex. Build it higher. Mr. Sullivan smiled, knowingly. He used to say, you reminded him of himself when he was young. Everyone thought he was too quiet, too careful, until he wasn't. After he left, I stood at the window, holding the watch, looking out over the city my grandfather had helped build. The empire hadn't just changed hands. It had evolved. Phoenix Global Ventures would take Harrison Industries places my family had never dreamed possible. My phone buzzed one last time. The Asian markets were opening, and our stocks were soaring. Somewhere in their newly downsized lives, my family was probably watching the same numbers, finally understanding what they'd lost. But I wasn't interested in their regret. I had an empire to run. 1 year after the takeover, I stood at the podium of Harrison Industries, now Phoenix Harrison Global's annual shareholder meeting. The auditorium was packed with investors, board members, and media, all eager to hear about our record-breaking year. When I took control of this company, I began. Many questioned whether tradition could adapt to innovation. Today's numbers answer that question decisively. The screens behind me displayed our achievements. Stock value up 150%, expansion into 12 new markets, and a corporate culture that had earned us a spot on Forbes' Best Places to Work list. The old family empire had been transformed into a modern global powerhouse. In the back of the room, I spotted a familiar face, my cousin Victoria, now working as a junior analyst at a competing firm. Our eyes met briefly before she looked away. Last I'd heard, William was selling real estate in Florida, and Uncle Richard had retired to a much smaller house in the suburbs. Success, I continued, isn't inherited, it's built. Sometimes quietly, sometimes against the odds, but always with vision and purpose. After the presentation, during the reception, Sarah approached with an interesting piece of news. Your Aunt Patricia is trying to arrange a family reconciliation. She's been calling the office all week. I touched my grandfather's pocket watch, now a constant companion in my suit pocket. What's her angle? Apparently, William's real estate venture is struggling. They're hoping for some family investment opportunities. Send them our standard investor packet, I replied. Same process as anyone else. The empire I'd built wasn't about revenge. It was about proving that true success comes from merit, not birthright. My family had never understood that, and they probably never would. Later that evening, as I did my final walk through the office, a habit I'd learned from my grandfather, I found myself in the company museum. The newly installed timeline showed the company's evolution from my grandfather's early days to the family's reign, and finally to Phoenix Harrison Global's emergence as a market leader. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Tokyo acquisition completed. We now have controlling interest in the Asian market. I smiled, remembering how my family had laughed when I'd first gone to Asia to find myself. They'd never understood that I was finding something much more valuable. I was finding my way to build an empire they couldn't imagine. The last display in the museum was my grandfather's old desk, preserved exactly as he'd left it. On it sat a framed photo I'd never seen before, a young version of him, standing much like I had, watching and waiting for his moment. Your grandfather would be proud, Mr. Sullivan's voice came from behind me. The old chauffeur still visited occasionally, a living connection to the company's past. He saw something in you, the old man continued, something the others were too busy showing off to notice. I nodded, thinking of all the quiet conversations in this building, all the lessons learned while others weren't watching. He taught me that real power isn't about who shouts the loudest in board meetings. No, Sullivan smiled. It's about who builds the strongest foundation, while others are bragging about their corner offices. As I left the building that night, I passed the wall of CEO portraits. My grandfather's face smiled down with that knowing look he'd always had. Next to his photo hung mine, not the polished corporate headshot my family would have chosen, but a candid shot taken while I was working late, sleeves rolled up, focused on building something extraordinary. The empire hadn't just changed hands, it had changed purpose. Phoenix Harrison Global wasn't about family legacy anymore. It was about creating opportunities for people who, like me, were willing to work quietly and prove themselves through action rather than name. My phone buzzed one final time. A message from Tommy, my young cousin who just started in our management training program. Unlike his parents, he'd been willing to earn his place. Thanks for the chance to prove myself, Alex. I smiled, typing back, just remember what Grandpa always said. Watch, learn, and build in silence. The rest will follow. The city lights twinkled below. As I headed home, my grandfather's watch keeping time in my pocket. The empire was secure, not because of the family name, but because of the foundation I'd built while they weren't looking. Sometimes the quietest one in the room is the one you should watch most carefully. My family had learned that lesson too late. The end